Worked in consciousness, awareness all his life, and he has a strong point in magnetics. He worked for many years with Otis Carr. You may be familiar with the story by now. If you're not, it's a very exciting story. They built several vehicles that basically teleported. This was in the late 50s and early 60s. Ralph was a technician on that project. He now lives in Las Vegas, and we're very happy to have him here. I think we're very blessed. So let's welcome Ralph Ring.
Are we okay? Well, good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming to listen to my story. I want to thank the Source for being here. And I want to thank Project Camelot. They're the main reason I'm here. I had gone into seclusion for a while. I had retired from a long life of being a locksmith for 35 years. And I had, for 40 years, I tried to get people interested in levitation, in teleportation, things of that nature, which were very simple to me and the people I worked with. But nobody, they either didn't believe it or they thought, well, it's just not going to happen or something. So anyway, along came Project Camelot and said that the time now is changing where people would listen now to things that I once said were scoffed at or not listened to. And they asked me if I'd do an interview. I said, okay. So they took one interview, and I don't know, the sound on it didn't come out right, so they came back and did another interview. And that somehow got on, I didn't know it was going on the internet, but it went on the internet. And I started getting responsive calls from people on my email and some of the phone numbers that I had let out. And people said, yeah, we are really genuinely interested. We want to hear what you're talking about and see if there's any value there that we can use to foster this technology. So that being said, I was told to wear a jacket tonight, and I see everybody else is casual. I envy you all. I don't know why I got a jacket on now, but I do. I'm here. I would have come in on one of our craft, truly, if it hadn't been confiscated 40 years ago. It was taken and put in someplace in, I think it was called. It's in New Mexico. It's an underground facility that the government has, and it's nine stories down. It was seen by a professor friend of mine several years after it was confiscated. And I was told that they had tried to operate it, which was unsuccessful. They tried to mount weapons on it, which was also unsuccessful. And the reason was because they didn't have the keys. They didn't know how to operate it because the keys lie in consciousness, in a conscious awareness of what they're looking at. Tomorrow morning, you'll be listening to a good friend of mine, Jim Murray, who has a device that's been working for years that scientists from all over the world have looked at his machine and verified to everybody's satisfaction that it was a working machine, putting out more energy than it was drawing. And the group that was interested in it said, well, yeah, but it's working, but it's violating the second law of thermodynamics. You can't have something working like this. It doesn't, our science says it can't work, even though they were seeing that a working machine. So that's been my story as well, all these years. I show them levitation, I show them teleportation, and it's quite simple. The principles of everything I'm going to talk about tonight is simplicity. There's no heavy studying or learning or academic education necessary to understand the laws of nature, and that's my premise. When I was a kid, I loved magnetics. I played with, every time I got a hold of a magnet, I had to figure out what I could do with it and turn it upside down and put it with another magnet and so forth. And I just saw the simplicity of magnetism. And I also saw that along with all the benefits of magnetism, which is electricity and electromagnetics, et cetera, magnetism itself is a great power, is a power second to none, really, in the whole universe. And while I'm going, this is from Project Camelot. I'm going to run this down and just briefly so you can see some things. That's me when I was happy. And that's me over here, if you can see it. When I wound up building a replica of our 45-foot craft in Prescott, actually Chino Valley, California, just up above Prescott. And we put it underground. It's a 45-foot dish. I'll show you pictures of that later if you're interested. And that's what I looked like then. I looked like I belonged out in nature, and that's where I was. Let's see. Here's a picture of a 45-foot craft that we had, and this was we had one in Norman, Oklahoma. Carr had that in Norman, Oklahoma. He put in for a patent for a levitation device to levitate and float these craft around, and his idea was to go back and forth to the moon and so forth and so on. The patent office looked at it and said, "Well, no, there's no such thing as levitation now, and that's ridiculous. We can't give you a patent on that." And Carr said, "Well, it's working, and your engineers have verified that I've got something here that you've never seen before, and I'm asking for a patent." And they said, "No, we can't give you a patent on that because it's just not going to happen." And so they went back and forth with Carr's people and the patent people, and I'm kind of filling in here because I wasn't there, and I'm putting in pieces that I'm pretty sure are accurate. They said that if you pull the levitation device out that makes this thing levitate off the ground, we will give you a patent for an amusement device. And you can put it in an amusement park and let people ride it. So that didn't set too well, but Carr thought, well, okay, that's a start anyway. We'll put one up, and we'll get people introduced to the concept. And he then went into toys, making small models that kids could buy and mail order stuff, and then build their own models using magnets and everything to get them familiar with the technology involved. And the technology is a lot different because it's all natural. It deals with the natural science as opposed to the man-created sciences, if you will. And the difference is knowing. We live in a system of duality. We have a yes and a no, and a right and a wrong, and an up and a down, and a left and a right, and that's fine. And that's got us to where we are today. But it's also got us into kind of a bind because it replicates chasing our tail. We can't seem to make up our minds which way to go. This is a small model that we had. We can't seem to make up our minds which way we want to go. And in studying natural law, there's only one law, and that's you either know or you don't know. There's no guesswork. It's like you know when you're hungry. You know when you want to sleep. You know when you want to go to the restroom. These are knowing. These are all natural knowingness. It has a great deal of difference from the synthetic or invented system of guesswork, of belief, if you will. You can believe this, but somebody can come along and get you to disbelieve it, and vice versa. So you go around and around and around all your life sometimes for some people and never seem to get anywhere until you stand up and look into natural law, which is either you know or you don't know. And if you don't know, then you proceed along a line that's comfortable for you. You proceed into the subject matter that you're studying, and you don't give up until you know what it is. There's no more guesswork. And you don't have to try to do this, because if you're following natural law, it will come to you. All you have to do is start it. The first step is just, I want to learn this, I want to know this. And just start it, and pretty soon it will start teaching you. I didn't know a lot of things about a lot of things, and I gave up conventional education when I was in high school. In the physics class, you might have heard this if you'd seen the Google or this Project Camelot presentation, but I was in physics class, and the teacher was saying, bumblebees can't fly. It's impossible. They can't, aerodynamically, they can't fly. And I was on the second floor of the classroom, and this was in Santa Cruz, California, in the high school, and I looked out the window, and there was a big, beautiful bumblebee staring at me right in the eye. And he was standing there doing something that this guy said he couldn't do. So I decided, and I was raised in the woods. I was raised in Northern California in a place called Paradise. It's up above Chico. And I learned a lot about natural law there. I pestered an anthill. We used to walk back and forth to school, my sister and I. We'd walk 7 miles through the woods to school every day, and we had to carry our water, and we had no lights and no telephone service. So we had to learn how to do things just naturally, because we didn't have anything else. Well, one of the things that taught me natural law, the first thing that I can remember, was an anthill that we encountered. It was about 3 feet, maybe higher, 3.5 feet tall, and there was thousands and thousands of ants crawling around it. And I was curious. I've always been curious, so I wanted to see what they were doing, and I started poking them with a stick to see what they do. Well, I didn't know they could spit acid. They're called spit ants or something. I don't know what they were, but they got all over me and just stung the heck out of me. And I've never forgotten that lesson. And after that, I respectfully went back and appreciated the anthill. I went back and said, gave my apologies and said, no more, I've had enough of you, and I'll behave myself. And so from then on, I understood that you get back what you put out. If you go pester something, you're going to get pestered back one way or another. Sooner or later, what goes around comes around, the old thing. That's natural law. That's the first law of nature. So anyway, getting back to the bumblebee, I quit. I got out of school. I just walked out and said, no, I'm going back to the woods, which I did. I went back to nature, and because I was learning a lot, just observing things and not pestering, but just observing and being very careful of how I observed what was happening. And I ran into a person. His name was Arthur Aho. He was the brother of Wayne Aho, who worked with Carr and I in Apple Valley and more in Oklahoma as well. He was one of Mr. Carr's entourage. And he said, well, you've got to give credit to everybody. Everything is true. And this is what Carr told me later, too. That there is nothing but truth. There's only one, and it's just one simple truth. And I said, no, wait a minute now. I've heard all these people saying this is right, this is wrong, this is up. And he said, no, everything is true in frames of reference, in degrees. in how you're looking at it. There's a principle called the Heisenberg principle. I don't know, some of you, I'm sure, have heard of it, where they cannot find an absolute. They've looked and looked and looked. In fact, they just blew up a $146 billion collider in Innsbruck, I think it was, because they were looking for the absolute. They were looking for smaller than quarks, smaller than this, smaller than this. We've got to find it. Well, it was a total waste of time, and I don't know what they're doing now, but they just blew up a lot of money. And what Aho explained to me was that, and he told me about the Heisenberg principle, that anything you look at, you are vibrating energy. You are radiating out of these eyes. You're radiating energy. You're a live being. And everything you're looking at, you're changing right in front of your eyes. You don't realize it consciously, but that's what's happening. So you're never going to get to the absolute, because the energy it takes to measure something also changes it. So I said, okay, well, what's that got to do with the bumblebee and the teacher? He said, well, he was right. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, he said a bumblebee can't fly aerodynamically. Yeah, and he's right. And I said, well, what did bumblebees do? And they said, well, they levitate. And I said, well, how's that? And he says, come on, I'll show you. And he showed me. He wrote a book, incidentally. I don't know if it's still in print. It's in the Library of Congress. The book is called Tomorrow's Energy Need Not Be Fuel. And in that book, he gave reference to what I'm talking about, that that of levitation, that the bumblebee, when he starts to beat his wings, when he starts to flap his wings, there's a little cavity, a hollow cavity next to the larynx inside his system that's hollow. And when he beats his wings, he starts to resonate this energy, and it goes back and forth, just similar to a guitar strumming on one side of the room and hitting the same chord on the other side of the room, or somebody hitting a high C and breaking a crystal. It's the same thing. It's resonance. And he said what they do, they resonate. And when they resonate, they eventually reach the resonance of the field around them. And he explained it this way to me, that the earth was, of course, spinning, but it was operating on a frequency of 8.5 hertz per second or so forth. And he says once this bumblebee hits that resonant frequency of its surroundings, it becomes a free agent. It creates a magnetic bubble around itself, and it can go anywhere it wants. And I said, well, that's not in any of the science books. He said, I know. You probably never see it there either, but that's what happens. They'll discover it someday and bring it out, but it's just we have a conventional way of doing things, and then we have a natural way of doing things, and they're totally different. They're diametrically opposed in many, many cases. Well, let's see. I'll backtrack here a little bit. This when I got out of the service, I went into the Army and went to basic training in Fort Ord, California. And I noticed I kept putting in for engineering school, and they kept putting me back in the infantry. And I noticed a phenomena there that I'll never forget, that when we went out to the firing range, we'd have to go out every morning to fire. We'd cross this wooden bridge, and we'd have to double time in cadence. Up, 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 up. And every day that we went over that bridge, it collapsed. The boards would fall apart, and the bridge would fall apart. Well, I later learned, I didn't know it then, but I later learned that this is resonance. When you reach the resonant frequency of anything, you can change it. You can transform it, if you will. So that, coupled with my interest in magnetics, got me further into magnetics, which was resonance. And I thought, well, someday I'm going to put this to use. And I've always thought of people having their transportation and their habitation as a simple vehicle that'll levitate all over. We don't have to put asphalt and cement down all over the ground. We can get up off the ground and let nature do her thing. Just go back to being a beautiful garden. And I could see then that we could put gardens on board our craft. We could have parks. We could have tennis courts, swimming pools, whatever we wanted that we have now, but we could get off the ground with it. And I was calling them floating homes. That was my my terminology in those days. I said, I've always wanted to build floating homes. After that, floating cities, and after that, floating countries. I mean, it's really going to have to happen someday. And so I'm just an early bird, I guess, or I was an early bird until I met Carr. Well, I went in the service. I learned more about resonance, but they trained me as a heavy weapons operator, and I eventually wound up in Korea on a machine gun. And we had mortars, 4.2 mortars, and big heavy artillery. And I got wounded 4 times and got frostbite and everything. And I didn't care much for the service at all. I was really kind of burned out on it, kind of a deal. And I saw I was never going to get into engineering school. So when I got back, I got out of the service, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I looked in the paper, and there wasn't any ads for machine gunners or mortar people or heavy artillery. I didn't know what I was going to do. Well, one of the stops before Korea was Guam, a little island out in the Pacific, and while the rest of the guys were going down to fight in the bars, I found that I could go diving. Not scuba, but skin diving and snorkeling around the island. They had a lot of nice reefs and everything there. And I got real attached to the nature of diving and all the things that go on, and I learned quite a bit. So when I got out, I said, well, that's the only other thing I can think of. And I ran an ad in the paper and got some gear, and I started a skin diving and then scuba diving business. And I did some hard hat diving as well. And that was in San Francisco, California. And my family lived down the coast in Newport Beach, California. They lived down the coast, and they said, well, why don't you come on down this way? So I kind of gravitated down the coast. I stopped off in Santa Barbara and did some abalone diving for a while, and then I got down to Newport and continued my diving. And I was doing all sorts of diving. And I was doing exploration, I was doing survey work, I was doing photography work, recovery, repair. And I was doing okay financially. I met a girl and decided to get married, and I'm kind of stepping this up because I got a lot to tell you. I got married and had a couple of children, and the work that I was doing was kind of dangerous, but it paid really good. So I continued to do it until the kids were wanting a dad at home, and so was my wife. She wanted me home more often because I'd have to stay out sometimes a week at a time and sometimes more. So anyhow, one day a dive boat from a U.S. Divers Company, which created the Aqualung, pulled up alongside, and they had heard of me and my diving, and I had kind of a daredevil diving career then, but I had a good reputation. So they said, well, would you be interested in becoming a research diver for U.S. Divers? And I said, well, yeah, maybe. I'll come in and talk to you. I told my wife about it. She said, go, because she thought it'd be more money and I could stay on land more often. So I went up and talked to them and immediately got hired in the research and development department as a research lab tech and a research diver. And I was given the task of the wraparound mask in those days. This was quite a while ago. And they had a mask that went all the way around, and they had distortion on both sides, and my job was to get the distortion out of the mask. Well, I did that. I went out and I kind of got the mask to work without distortion by realizing the temperature that was heated, the temperature they used to heat the glass was where the problem was. We adjusted the temperature and the distortion went away. So, but they were having me do other things, and some of them were deep dives. And I remember going down, I was down 250 feet, ran out of air, and I had to come up quite abruptly. Well, if any of you have done any diving or heard about any diving, when you're when you're down there, you're compressed. All your air is compressed. So all I had to do was exhale, but I exhaled forever coming up that distance. And I was only down there for 2 or 3 minutes, so I didn't have any hang-off time. I didn't have to decompress on the way up. But I got up to the top, and my wife had heard about that and a few other little incidences that I was involved with that were kind of risky. And she said, "No, you better find a land job, because this isn't working for the kids and so forth, and it's not going to be working for you much longer if you keep risking it." She said, "Here's an ad in the paper. It's for a lab tech at a place called Advanced Kinetics here in Costa Mesa, California, which was close to Newport. They want a lab tech." And I said, "Well, I don't have any, I'm a machine gunner and a diver. I did work as a machinist for a little while, but that wasn't very much." And she said, "Well, you're tinkering all the time. My house is full of junk, and you're putting these things together. You should be able to go down there and do or say something." So I said, "Well, okay, I'll go down and give it a shot." So I went down, and I hit him right at lunchtime. And nobody was there, no receptionist, nobody. Hello, nobody. And I was walking down the hall, and I passed the director's office. His name was Dr. Weinhardt. And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "I was looking for a job." And he said, "No, they're all out to lunch, come back." And I started to leave, and he said, "Wait a minute, what do you do? What's your qualifications?" And I said, "Well, I'm a student of natural law." And I thought then, well, that's the end of this interview. And he said, "Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about?" And I told him, I've investigated hummingbirds, which also levitate, and lizards that also levitate. There's certain breeds of lizards. And we were talking natural law. Well, he was a PhD, and he did know quite a bit about what I was talking about in magnetics, the different fields and the different frequencies and so forth. So he said, "So you're interested in magnetics, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, one of our engineers just quit last week, and I've got a magnetic project that we're working on, and it has to be, I have to fill that